What are we going to do with this one, Saito?
Make an example.
The introduction to Lord Saito is a complicated one, done quite well to reflect the complicated mentality of Saito himself. Throughout the flashbacks of Atsu as a child, witnessing her parents get slaughtered, and the additional flashbacks throughout the story that help piece together a clearer picture of the events of that night, Saito's attitude is odd to say the least. How he continues to say they need to make an example, apologizes to Atsu while affectionately referring to her as Little Wolf, to then pin her to her family's burning tree with her father's own sword, almost as if reaching out to comfort her and then turn around. Over 16 years later, while Saito commences an aggressive campaign of freedom and security from the shogun on the island of Ezo, his closest companions, the members of the Yotei 6, are being hunted down one by one, with each death weakening Saito's control over the entire island, and even his ability to keep his men calm. When he discovers this woman he's heard so much about that has already killed the Oni, Snake, and Kitsune, depending on when the player decides to break into his training grounds, Saito doesn't show anger, but disbelief, and then amusement. We get to see a first-hand account of how he can be so charming. As Hanbei and Atsu once said, he's not only a master of the warrior spirit, but has managed to manipulate it and build this false belief of keeping Ezo free, when in reality his tale of freedom from shogunate control is actually tied to his freedom in taking responsibility of the brutality of that night. By his own writings, fascination with Atsu, and even comparison to her at the end of the game, Saito is someone who is ultimately lost in delusion. There's no better place to start than with Saito's friendship with Kengo. On the surface, it's pretty straightforward, a blacksmith who walked away from a fallen lord after the clan was destroyed. But nothing about that time was simple. After Nagashino, what was left of Saito's men were starving, scattered, and desperate. They turned to raiding villages just to stay alive. How far they went, no one really says, apart from Yone making it clear that they were reduced to raiding villages. The specifics of the brutality or desperation in terms of unleashing on innocent bystanders are never really elaborated on, but it's clear that that was enough for Yone and Kengo to turn their backs on Saito, realizing that they weren't just running from the armies and the enemy anymore, but from the man they once called their master. So they left, and as Saito would put it, infected others to defect as well. That abandonment is much deeper than we realize as well, because if we dive into the writings of Lord Saito, he gives us a better understanding of his own mentality, how he viewed the Battle of Nagashino, how it shaped him going forward, and most importantly for today's video, how everything was reframed in his own head. These are not writings of someone detailing history, but someone who deflects and places blame for everything that's happened to him elsewhere, on the ultimate betrayal of Kengo. From Saito's own words, Kengo wasn't just a skilled swordsmith, he was the first friend he ever had. He was the first to welcome him home after a childhood spent living under another family's roof. For most of his life, Saito had lived with the clan that wasn't his own. He wore their colors, learned their customs, spoke their words. And while he was treated well enough, he never truly belonged there. Because in reality, he was a hostage. He was a token of peace. It was common practice at that time in Japan where lords would send their sons to live with rival clans as a promise of loyalty, a safeguard against any form of betrayal. And so, in this political climate where betrayal seemed rampant, if Saito's father ever decided to turn on this rival clan, then the child Saito would be the first to die for it. That was the price of peace. You had to sacrifice your son. When Saito finally returned home, it was Kengo that would actually come to see him as a person, not political leverage, or even as collateral. And not only that, he even went a step further and gifted him his first ever sword, the sword that he continues to wield to this very day on the island of Ezo. Would it also be too far to go a tad bit deeper and say that sword could have symbolized not only their friendship, but Saito finally having a place to belong after being sent out by his father? It would have been a welcome home that would have stuck with him for the rest of his life. Perhaps in some twisted way, Saito believed he was honoring the memory of his friend by holding on to it, by never letting go of what came between them. Apart from Kengo's welcome home, there's nothing suggesting their friendship ever soured before the Battle of Nagashino. In that battle, that's really where it all fell apart. The Battle of Nagashino was real. It was a turning point in Japan's history where the old world of sword and horse met the new age of gunfire. Saito would have fought under the Takeda banner, one of the great clans crushed that day. Thousands of samurai charged headlong into Oda Nobunaga's gun lines and were torn apart. It wasn't just a defeat, it was the death of everything men like Saito were raised to believe in. By his own words, he watched generals fall, his allies vanished, and his way of life burn away all in front of him while he was unable to do anything about it. When the smoke cleared, the Takeda were finished, and every vassal tied to them became a target, which would include Clan Saito, which no longer existed after this battle since the majority of his clan died during it as well. This creates the backstory of why Saito flees north, taking what little remained of his clan to Ezo. But exile changes him. For someone born into the order of lords and vassals, honor and obedience had always been constants. Now he was stripped of title, he was hunted, and he was starving because the rice fields that supplied his clans were seized. And it was precisely during this exile that Saito's code would turn inwards. His own words show it clearly. His pride becomes bitterness. Discipline becomes his obsession, his driving force. And it was during this unfortunate time period that Saito would lose his wife and daughter to famine. His daughter, as he says, her laughter would die long before her body does, and then his wife would commit suicide, unable to live with the thought of her daughter dying. According to Sakichi, better known as the Spider, his sister was just learning to walk when she died.
You murdered my brother and expect me to help rescue yours?
The other grave. You lost someone else?
Our sister, Fumi. She starved to death after your father deserted us. She was just learning to walk.
He speaks of her loss with the same bitterness that runs through his father's writings. To Saito, the death of his wife and daughter wasn't the result of failure, it was strictly all rooted in betrayal. He had believed they could recover after the Battle of Nagashino, that even in exile they could rebuild. He wrote of being confident they would even thrive, that the North could become a refuge rather than a grave. But when Kengo, the man who once forged his blade and called him friend, left, Saito saw it as a moment everything fell apart. In his letters on loss, he writes that had they had not been betrayed, they would have been in a strong position. His wife and daughter would still be alive. And so to him, their deaths were not caused by war or starvation, but by a break in faith, a failure of loyalty to his vision. And it's that belief that one act of betrayal destroyed everything, and would in turn define the man he became. Through this perception, it became justified to kill Kengo as his treachery caused all the lives that perished during that period of great starvation. However, his belief in that would be challenged when he learns of Atsu and Jubei. To reduce all of this to Saito seeing Atsu as a reflection of the daughter he lost would miss the point. His feelings were never that clean throughout that entire night, or really even throughout the whole game. What drove him wasn't grief alone, it was the desire for regaining control. The need to reclaim something from the ruin he blamed everyone else for causing. After burying his wife and daughter and reaching the island of Ezo, Saito would track Kengo down. By then, his reason for coming after Kengo was a form of symbolic justice. Despite everyone else around him, or on the receiving side anyways, seeing it for what it really was, vengeance. It was a mix of final closure, the end of a chapter built on nothing but shame and pain, and the beginning of something new, though still rooted in the same delusion. The belief that Kengo's death was justified because Saito was still a lord. Better yet, the so-called shogun of the north. In his mind, killing Kengo was purely duty, a necessary act to keep Ezo free from the tyranny of the mainland shogun and the weak Matsumai clan that served him. That's the story Saito told himself in the Yotei 6. The illusion that what he was doing was noble, that the blood he spilled had a purpose. But that clean, honorable mission could never survive the reality that unfolded the night of the burning tree. Because the truth was, he wasn't fighting tyranny, he was killing a friend. He was slaughtering a family whose only crime was being tied to the man he blamed for everything he'd lost, and even in the worst case, it was Kengo's burden to bear, not all of theirs. Saito had every intention of killing Kengo that night. Discovering he had children, especially after losing his own, would have been an enraging, envious blow. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was salt on top of the wound. How dare Kengo, this deserter, walk away, take it upon himself to infect others with doubt, and then still have the comfort of a family while Saito starved and died. Because Saito's sons were still surviving, living reminders of what Saito still had, I would reckon that's why Jubei doesn't carry as much weight on Saito's conscience, because Saito's two sons are still around, despite the two of them even saying that period of death and starvation permanently changed him. Atsu, on the other hand, wasn't just a reflection of his daughter, but of what could have been, the life she never had the chance to live. Seeing Atsu's spirit, expressive, curious, even defiant, pulled at something buried beneath all this time of pure rage. A father's instinct fighting against everything the warlord in him demanded. That's why in that final moment when he apologizes and reaches out to her, it's actually not any form of manipulation or cruelty, it's genuine. It's a brief fractured moment of truth from someone who spent years of lying to himself and only becoming more and more embittered about everything that has happened to him. He knows the immense pain of a father who's seen their daughter get killed, his path to starvation, something out of his hands. Meanwhile, in this moment, he's taken it upon himself to take the life of another's, something that's entirely within his own control. I would even reckon that's exactly why he turns around and walks away and doesn't watch Atsu get killed. But not actually watching her die, or even doing it himself, allows him to distance himself from the whole horrible ordeal. Even if he supposedly watched that tree burn as he claims he did, his explanation would have been anything but him actually killing Atsu himself. Yes, he pinned her to the tree, but it was in fact the Oni that lit that tree on fire. And that's how it essentially remained for the next 16 years. He had no idea she lived, or that she was even the Onryo, returning to the island, hunting down his closest subordinates. And when he realizes it is in fact her, it's back to him being genuinely happy, because he didn't kill her. Miraculously, she survived, and being so far removed from that entire situation, perhaps they could fight together under a free Ezo, completely bypassing the fact that she did kill multiple Yotei 6 members and continues to undermine his authority. Does it really matter if he returns to the idea that this is the daughter he could have always had, as a weird form of spiritual adoption, that this is his new kin, and all the men that she slaughtered while her time on Ezo was nothing more than her culling the weak and proving she's worthy of fighting underneath him? That first spar was all amusement just to see how much she's grown. He never pulls out his katana, calls her Little Wolf again, and seems to hold that kind of position with her until the end of the game, where amusement becomes mixed with anger. She did take his two sons remaining from him, leaving him completely alone. And it's during that final showdown between the two of them, he continues to even compare himself to her, as he says they're both creatures that can't reject the call of revenge. When Atsu burns the cloth with the Yotei 6 members' names on it, and she says that she found a new reason to live, that's when he readies his stance and gets angry. And then, when he dies, he says two final words to her.
You are alone. Come, little wolf.
Even as he answers the call of death, Saito's two conflicting thoughts towards Atsu breaks through, the affection and the hatred. He reminds her that despite killing him, Jubei's gone, and she's still alone. But maybe those words aren't meant for her at all. Maybe they're for himself. A final attempt to create a bond that never truly existed. To convince himself that some part of this all still meant something between him and Atsu. Because in the end, Saito's tragedy isn't just what he did, it's what he tried to believe. That even in ruin, he was still a lord, still a father, still something more than the monster he became. What do you think? Was Saito reaching for redemption in those last moments, or just trying to drag someone else down with him?